It's mid-May. The world's been in lockdown for 2 months, and a lot of us are thinking about heading back to work and school in the next few weeks. I'm here with our global VP of FICO's fraud business, Adam Davies, to talk about some of the things that fraud managers should be on the lookout for during the pandemic. Adam, tell me a little bit about what we should be doing to protect our customers during this period.
It's an interesting time, right? Things are changing dramatically, and they change day by day. So the best fraud teams out there right now are the ones that I'm seeing that are most adaptable to change, right? They're able to take steps forwards, and more importantly, what they're doing is they're prioritizing. And so hopefully the conversation today and what we wrote in the blog will give people an idea of where they should be prioritizing. In terms of customers, like we owe it to them to protect them right now, right? So there's a high levels of unemployment in many countries, right? People are without their jobs. Money for them can be quite tight. So the last thing they need is their account taken over right now, or have to go through a big ordeal in claiming back money because of a fraud they've experienced. So it's important to think about customers from that perspective, even as we see people adopting new channels, as we see people perhaps using services or products they've not done before, like online banking as an example, that we think about all those moments that are about friction. Right, so we want them to have access to their funds. We don't want to decline them too much. We don't want to be stepping them up in terms of authentication too much. And so with that, I think it's important to think about the type of segments of customers that we really should be prioritizing. And historically, we'd think about protecting the elderly, and clearly right now, right during the crisis, we're all about trying to protect the elderly from getting this disease. But it's not just them, right? It's people who are new to your organization, new to bank, who perhaps aren't as familiar with security protocols. It's people that have multiple accounts with you and not necessarily high net worth, but they have their savings and their mortgage and their current account and their credit card. And if somebody takes that over, you could lose every bit of money you've got, even that's sat in your savings. So I think those are really important things to do, is try and perhaps minimize like I said, the declines, and minimize some of the friction that we may already have. I think the other thing is really important as well is there's a lot of change in fraud going on. So there's a lot of scams and things at the moment. And so we've got to think about the messaging we put out to customers, right? We want to make sure they feel protected, that they're aware that there's these COVID-related scams out there, and make sure they don't get socially engineered or anything like that.
I mean, that's very true. We've heard a lot about various scams. Of course, people are engaging a lot with government, with their banks, with their credit card companies, with all sorts of other organizations. And I guess people are a bit under stress. They're feeling a bit anxious. It'd be quite easy to be caught up in a scam. What are some of the scams that you've heard about, and what sort of attacks are you seeing? What type of techniques?
So the attacks and techniques are no different than they were pre-COVID, right? It's just that they're using COVID as a way to get you to be emotionally involved in the fraud or the hack or the compromise they're attempting, right? So they prey on fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? If you get sent like, click here, it's really important, there's a cure for corona, or click here, you can get your government financial help much quicker. Click here, you can do this. So I think that's what we're really seeing, is the fact that they're using this time to prey on those fears, to target people, and harvest more information that ultimately is likely to result in an increase in account takeover fraud in the ensuing months that we see here. I think the other thing is that they've been affected as well, right? These fraudsters and these hackers. It's not just the fraud departments who can't run their call center right now. The scammers also. So I don't know if you've noticed, I've personally noticed there's been a lot less robocalling in this time frame, and there's been a lot of less of the call this number for Microsoft update, and I'm from Amazon Prime and I'm trying to dupe you out of I'm trying to compromise you in some way, and I get on the phone with some guy who's in a call center. They can't do that either. So there's been a shift towards a lot of the ishing variants, so smishing, vishing, and so on and so forth. So even to the point where my wife has received 2 of these text messages over the last month or so about sort of small business, aimed at the messaging is aimed at somebody who owns a small business, which he owns. So interesting, right? They're changing their tactics like we are, right? They're having to adapt and maintain their businesses, but they're using this as a moment to really compromise more data.
That's a really good point. And, obviously they're making the most of a crisis. Fraud never sleeps. But tell me, beyond the sort of specific scams, are there some other broader trends that you're seeing across fraud?
I mean, it's really interesting, right? Because normally in fraud management, what we often find ourselves doing is we look in the rearview mirror. So we look at what happened yesterday or last week or last month, what frauds happened and how could I catch them quicker or fast next time? Or I look back and see what did I miss and how can I catch that again tomorrow? But in reality, if we look into the past, the transactional mix has been very different. So we've seen big fluctuations in authorization volumes, in the channel mix of card transactions, as an example. So we've seen card present go up in some areas, we've seen card not present go up probably by 20 to 25%. As people have shifted from sort of on-premise transactions. But equally, certain CNP transactions have actually declined. So airlines, hotels, bookings, holidays, all of those. So there's been a shift in the CNP transactions. There's been a shift in card present, right? So there's a lot less POS usage other than groceries and the likes, right? And there's also been a shift in kind of ATM usage. People aren't going to branches as much. They're going online and mobile. We've seen increases in the use of contact payments. So, people don't want to even put their PIN number into a device. And a lot of the rules that we use in fraud management often use historical values to help us identify whether this current transaction is anomalous. But a lot of those historical counters are currently not really valid, right? The rolling count of transactions in the last 30-day window looks very different than the 30-day window prior to COVID. So a lot of people are going to have to look at the rules and make sure they really focus on those variables that are long windows, because they're going to be potentially causing like false positive rates or increased friction that I talked about earlier on.
And you talked about, obviously, fraudsters are disrupted. They're having to work in new ways. But of course, fraud departments, what about them? I mean, the fraud departments are probably working in smaller teams. They're more distributed. They're perhaps working in some cases from home. What does this mean for the way they have to approach the task at hand?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly difficult. I think obviously the biggest impacted area is the operational capacity, right? We use call centers, we call customers to confirm whether they did these transactions or not, and that clearly is difficult to manage when people are working remote. So I think some of these banks have done incredible jobs at being able to get these people that normally work in a call center to work from home that quick. But as a result of that, processes are changing, call handle times have gone up. We can't manage the call volume. So we're going to have to really think about the caseload that we can get through. Again, it's about priority. Where is my biggest risk happening? But I think some of the best-in-class banks that we've been engaged with have done, they already had a multi-skilled kind of operational team that could work different types of fraud. So I think they've benefited. And the people that have benefited the most are frankly those that use auto-resolution technology, because it can work all of the cases you throw at it without human intervention and be able to resolve a fraud case with a customer through multiple channels without really having to need a human to manage that case. So those that have done that have been able to adapt, and because of the limited operational capacity here, they've been able to increase the auto resolution capacity on the other side. But it's not just the operational teams, also the strategy and analytics guys, the strategy teams who normally forecast where fraud is going next. They think about what the fraud budget will be. They're analyzing risk appetites. They've had to kind of turn things upside down a little bit and redo some of that work in terms of what's an acceptable decline rate in these days, right? And then the analytics teams, this is when it pays to not have 400 or 500 rules on your platform, right? And many of those rules were used for flash frauds pre-COVID. It pays to really trust the score right now. The score adapts automatically if you're using machine learning. It's much better to rely on that right now and perhaps reduce the number of rules that you have to manage on a day-to-day basis. Because if you're working at home doing data queries, it can be difficult, especially if your children are on Fortnite all day long and taking up your bandwidth. So I think, everyone's adapting, but those are some of the things that we've seen.
That's a good point about the potential lag that some fraud teams will experience with rules-based systems. Again, in the next month or two, we're seeing another big change. Economies in some states and countries opening up again. What do you think is going to happen in the next month? What changes will we see yet again now that this change is coming?
So I think we're not necessarily going to see a change, but a continuous series of changes, right? So we were like this pre-COVID, and then we're here, and it doesn't just jump back the other way, much like presidents and prime ministers and things of many countries have said, right? You don't just turn the light back on. So, it's useful if you've got all those rules from pre-COVID there that you can bring back again as needed, but you're not going to see suddenly card present jump back up by 25% when it just dropped 20%. You're going to see these gradual changes. So what that means is we have to be able to continue to adapt, right? The old frauds or channels that we suffered with will come back, but these new ones they've got hold of, these new things are going to remain as well. So it's going to be even more important to prioritize. But I think we're going to have to put focus on a few areas. So account takeover and faster payments. A lot of data has been compromised during this period. It's quite interesting. I think Krebs Security put out a graphic that showed how many fake websites had been created every day that had the term or a term related to COVID, and how many of those were likely illicit. And it's a crazy graph of thousands of different websites. So there's clearly been a focus whilst the fraudsters can't execute some of the frauds that they did before. They've grown to other areas and they've been on the hunt for compromising in this time. So we're likely to see an increase in account takeover. And as a result, they want to get the money out as quick as possible. So that's faster payments, real-time payments, P2P type transactions. And I also think what we're going to see as well is a continued rise in application fraud and synthetic fraud. So as people are rapidly trying to enable these digital channels to maintain customer growth, and sometimes doing so by bypassing some of the protocols or security controls they could have put in place. We need to be on the watch out for a rise in kind of application fraud on those digital channels.
So a lot of food for thought there, Adam. Thanks very much. I'm sure the fraud managers and their teams out there will be very interested in what you've had to say today. And if they're interested in reading more, there are some blogs available that you and your team have written on the FICO blog. I encourage our viewers to go to fico.com and click on the blog button and investigate some of those pieces. It's been a pleasure talking to you this time, Adam, and look forward to doing it again very soon. Stay safe and talk to you then.
Thanks, Axel. Take care. Bye-bye.